Close your eyes for a second. Picture a rock, not a boulder, a mesa, a flat-topped mountain rising 1,300 feet straight up from the desert floor. That's taller than the Empire State Building. The cliffs on the east side drop 400 meters, almost vertically, into the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea. The air is so hot and so dry that your lips crack within minutes of arriving. Nothing grows here. Nothing lives here. Rain falls maybe twice a year. Now picture a man standing on top of that rock, around 35 BC, telling his architects he wants a palace built here. Not a bunker, not a barracks, a palace. With frescoed walls, mosaic floors, a Roman bathhouse with heated floors, a swimming pool, gardens, and enough storerooms to feed 1,000 people for years. And he doesn't just want it on top of the mountain, he wants part of it hanging off the edge. 3 terraces, carved into the northern cliff face, suspended over a drop that would kill you in about 6 seconds. The man's name is Herod, and he wasn't crazy, he was terrified. So how do you build swimming pools and heated bathhouse floors on a cliff where it rains 2 inches a year? How do you hang a 3-story palace off the side of a mountain without steel, without concrete, without a single power tool? And why would anyone try? To answer that, you need to understand what was chasing Herod. And what was chasing Herod was everyone. Put yourself in ancient Judea, around 72 BC. You're born in Idumea, the region just south of the main Jewish territory. Think of it as the wrong side of the tracks in ancient Jewish politics. Your people, the Idumeans, were forcibly converted to Judaism only a generation ago. So in the eyes of the Jewish establishment in Jerusalem, you're not really Jewish. You're a convert's kid, an outsider, and that fact will haunt every single day of your life. Your father, Antipater, is wealthy, politically connected, married to a Nabatean princess. The family has money from the Dead Sea mineral trade, exporting the thick black asphalt that bubbles up from the water, and a talent for backing the right Roman general at the right time. When you're about 25, your father gets you appointed governor of Galilee. You crush a local revolt so brutally that the Jewish court in Jerusalem tries to put you on trial. You show up to the hearing flanked by armed soldiers. Nobody convicts you of anything. That's who you are. You understand power and you understand threat. You learn early that loyalty shifts, that today's ally becomes tomorrow's assassin, and that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. You keep 2,000 soldiers as your personal bodyguards. You send spies into the streets of Jerusalem. Some nights you disguise yourself and walk among the crowds, listening for whispers of rebellion. Imagine living in that head, going to sleep every night in a palace, surrounded by guards, and still not feeling safe. But here's where your story takes a turn that changes everything. It's 40 BC. The Parthians, a massive empire based in modern-day Iran, have just invaded the region. They've captured Jerusalem. They've put a rival king on your throne. Your brother is dead. Your family is in danger. You grab your mother, your sister, your fiancée Mariamne, and about 800 followers, and you run. Feel the desert under your feet. The air is so dry it burns your nostrils. Dust sticks to the sweat on your neck. You're heading south, into the emptiest part of your kingdom, toward a rock fortress that the Hasmonean kings used as a hideout decades earlier. That fortress is Masada. You arrive exhausted, hunted, with enemies closing in from every direction. You stash your family behind the walls with a garrison and enough supplies to survive. Then you keep running, all the way to Rome, where the Senate names you King of the Jews. It takes 3 years of warfare backed by Roman legions to actually claim your kingdom. But you never forget that rock in the desert. You never forget the place that saved your family when the world fell apart. And when you finally have the money and the power, you decide that Masada will never be just a hideout again. You're going to turn it into the most extraordinary fortress palace the ancient world has ever seen. But what Herod planned for that cliff went so far beyond fortress that even his own engineers must have thought he'd lost his mind. Step onto the plateau of Masada and feel the wind. It hits you from the east, blowing up from the Dead Sea, carrying the sharp mineral smell of salt and sulfur. The air tastes like it. Run your tongue across your lips, and you'll taste brine, faintly metallic, like licking a coin. Look down to the east, and the Dead Sea stretches out below you, this unnatural blue against the brown and beige of the Judean desert. To the west, nothing but sand-colored hills rolling toward Jerusalem, 50 miles away. The silence here is enormous. No birds, no insects, no water trickling anywhere, just wind. The plateau itself is roughly 550 meters long and 270 meters wide. In modern terms, that's about the size of 7 football fields laid end to end. Not huge, but when you're standing on top of a natural fortress with sheer cliffs on every side, it feels like a world. Herod looked at this rock and saw 2 things simultaneously. First, he saw safety. The cliffs were essentially unclimbable. The only access was a narrow path on the east side called the Snake Path, a switchback trail so treacherous that a handful of soldiers at the top could hold off an entire army. Second, and this is what separated Herod from every other paranoid king in history, he saw a canvas, a blank canvas, where he could build something that would make Rome itself take notice. Construction began around 35 BC. The first phase included the Western Palace, storerooms, and army barracks. 10 years later, around 25 BC, came the second phase, the one that would make Masada legendary. The Northern Palace, the bathhouse complex, the massive food storage facility, and the water system that made all of it possible. Think about the logistics for a second. Every stone that wasn't quarried directly from the plateau had to be hauled up the Snake Path. Every tool, every bag of volcanic ash imported from Italy for making waterproof cement, every wooden beam, every clay pipe for the bathhouse heating system. Donkeys, human porters, and crude pulley systems moving materials up a narrow switchback trail in desert heat day after day for years. Herod didn't import much building material. His engineers used local stone wherever possible, but then coated it, sculpted it, painted it, and plastered it to look like something far more expensive. It was resourceful brilliance disguised as Roman opulence. But before Herod could build any of it, he had to solve a problem that would have stopped any other builder in the ancient world dead in their tracks. And what he came up with is, honestly, the most impressive part of the entire story. Walk to the edge of the plateau and look down. What do you see? Rock. Dry, cracked, sun-blasted rock. The average temperature here in summer hits 40 degrees Celsius, about 104 Fahrenheit. The kind of heat where the stones burn your sandals. Rainfall is roughly 50 millimeters a year. That's 2 inches. For context, London gets about 600 millimeters. New York gets over 1,200. Masada gets less rain in an entire year than most cities get in a single afternoon storm. And Herod wanted swimming pools. He wanted bathhouses with hot and cold plunge pools. He wanted gardens. He wanted enough drinking water for hundreds of people, possibly 1,000, to survive a siege that could last years, in a place where there is, functionally, no water. Here's how he solved it. And this is where Herod stops being just a paranoid king and starts being something closer to an engineering genius. Picture the landscape around Masada. The desert isn't perfectly flat. There are wadis, dry riverbeds carved by flash floods that happen maybe once or twice a year. When rain does come to the Judean desert, it comes violently. A 20-minute downpour can send a wall of water crashing through these wadis, moving boulders, carving new channels, then vanishing within hours, soaked into the sand or evaporated by the heat. Herod's engineers built a system of dams and channels that intercepted these flash floods before the water could disappear. The channels funneled the water toward the base of Masada's cliffs, where workers had carved 12 enormous cisterns directly into the rock face. These weren't storage rooms. These were artificial caves, hacked out of the mountain by hand with chisels and hammers, in temperatures that would make a modern construction crew walk off the job. The total capacity of Masada's cistern system was roughly 40,000 cubic meters of water. Think about that for a second. 40,000 cubic meters is about 10.5 million gallons. That's enough to fill 16 Olympic swimming pools, in the desert, on a cliff. 2,000 years before the invention of the electric pump. Now imagine you're one of the workers carrying water from the lower cisterns to the top of the plateau. Put yourself there. The sun is directly overhead. You're carrying clay vessels strapped to the back of a donkey, and the animal is struggling up a narrow, zigzagging path cut into the cliff face. The rock is so hot under your feet that you can feel the heat through your sandals. Your throat is raw. The water you're hauling is for the king's bathhouse, not for you. Your shift lasts until the last vessel reaches the top. This wasn't a job for a few workers. It was a supply chain running constantly with teams of donkeys and human porters hauling water up hundreds of feet of elevation gain. And it worked. It worked so well that the cisterns could sustain the entire fortress for years without a single drop of rain. Herod didn't just build a water system. He built the ancient world's equivalent of a desalination plant. He took a place where survival was measured in days and turned it into a place where you could live, and live well, indefinitely. But the water was just the foundation. What Herod built on top of it is where this story goes from impressive to borderline unbelievable. Walk to the northern tip of the plateau. Feel the wind pick up as you approach the edge. It's stronger here because the cliff face catches the breeze coming up from the Dead Sea, and it funnels it right into your face. Your eyes water, your clothes press against your body, and when you look down, your stomach drops. Because you're standing at the top of Herod's northern palace. The Hanging Palace, 3 terraces built into the sheer cliff face, connected by staircases carved directly into the rock. The upper terrace, where you're standing, sat on the plateau itself. This was Herod's private quarters. 4 bedrooms with mosaic floors in black and white geometric patterns, the kind of detailed tile work you'd expect to find in a villa outside Rome, not on a desert cliff in Judea. The walls were covered in frescoes, painted plaster designed to imitate expensive marble. Close your eyes and run your hand along the wall. The surface is smooth, cool to the touch despite the desert heat outside, because the thick stone walls kept the interior temperature bearable. The plaster feels almost like polished stone under your fingertips. A semicircular balcony jutted out from the living quarters, and this is the part that would make a modern architect nervous. Stand on that balcony. Look north. The Dead Sea stretches before you, and on clear days you can see the oasis of Ein Gedi to the north, a shocking stripe of green in an otherwise brown landscape. The mountains of Moab rise on the far side of the sea, in what's now Jordan, their ridgeline purple in the morning light. Recent excavations suggest this balcony was more than just a viewing platform. Archaeologists found evidence of a viridarium, a formal pleasure garden with actual trees planted in the semicircular terrace. Imagine the smell. Desert wind carrying salt and dust, and then suddenly the green scent of living plants. Leaves rustling in the breeze, the only organic sound for miles in any direction. Herod ate breakfast here. A king who had enemies on every border, who had executed members of his own family because he suspected them of plotting against him, sat on this balcony in the morning, with the desert air cool before the day's heat set in, tearing flatbread and dipping it into olive oil from the groves of Jericho, the oil rich and peppery on his tongue, eating Judean dates so dense and sweet they tasted like caramel, and looking out at a view that still stops tourists dead in their tracks 2,000 years later. But that was just the top level, and the further down you go, the more audacious the architecture gets. Below the upper terrace, about 20 meters down, the middle terrace appears. This was a circular pavilion, surrounded by a colonnade, a ring of columns that created a shaded walkway at the very edge of the cliff. This wasn't a defensive structure. This was a place to sit, drink wine, and watch the sunset over the desert. The columns were made from local stone, then coated in sculpted plaster to look like they'd been carved from a single piece of imported marble. Herod's craftsmen created grooves and fluting on these columns that were essentially fake, but they looked extraordinary. And out here, hundreds of feet above the desert floor, who was going to inspect them closely? Below the middle terrace, another 15 meters down, the lower terrace opened up. This was the banquet hall, and it was here that Herod pulled off his most audacious architectural trick. Imagine descending the narrow staircase carved into the cliff. Your hand braces against the rock wall, which is warm from the sun. As you step onto the lower terrace, the wind dies down because you're now sheltered by the cliff face above you. The sudden quiet is startling. The air feels different here, warmer, more enclosed, like stepping into a room, even though you're technically still outside. The banquet hall was a square structure with columns on all four sides, creating a covered portico around the interior. The walls were covered in the most elaborate frescoes on the entire mountain. Painted panels designed to look like three-dimensional architectural elements, columns within columns, receding doorways that didn't actually exist, geometric patterns in red, black, and white. It was an optical illusion rendered in paint, turning a relatively modest space into something that felt grand. This is where Herod entertained his most important guests, and attached to this lower terrace was a private bathhouse, just for the Northern Palace residents. To put the scale of this construction in perspective, the retaining walls that supported these terraces were massive structures in their own right. Herod's engineers had to build platforms out from the cliff face to create flat surfaces where there were none. They used gigantic cut stones, fitted together without mortar, to extend the natural rock outward and create usable floor space. The engineering required to make 3 levels of livable space on a sheer cliff 2,000 years ago, without steel, without concrete as we know it, without cranes or power tools, is comparable to building a modern skyscraper on a mountainside, and Herod built it as a vacation home. But the Hanging Palace, as insane as it is, was only the private wing. The public side of Masada was a different world entirely. And to understand how far Herod was willing to go, you need to walk into his bathhouse. Feel the heat of the stone beneath your feet as you cross the open plaza. The midday sun is brutal here, reflecting off the pale limestone and hitting you from every angle. The air shimmers above the ground. Then you step through the entrance of the bathhouse and everything shifts. The first room is the apoditerium, the dressing room. The walls are decorated with frescoes, geometric patterns painted over smooth plaster. The floor is tiled in a triangular pattern. The temperature drops slightly because you're inside thick stone walls. Take off your sandals. The tile is cool. The air smells different in here, damp with a faint mineral tang from the water. Move into the tepidarium, the warm room. Here the temperature rises. The floor is noticeably warmer under your bare feet. This isn't from the sun. This is the hypocaust system, one of the most sophisticated pieces of Roman engineering ever exported to the provinces. Under the floor, a series of small stone and clay pillars support a raised platform. Between these pillars, hot air circulated, pumped in from an external furnace stoked by workers burning wood that had been hauled up the snake path on donkeys. Hollow clay pipes ran inside the walls, carrying the heated air upward so that the walls themselves became radiators. Press your palm against the plaster. It's warm, not hot, not burning, but a steady, comfortable warmth that turns this desert fortress into something that feels like a spa in central Rome. Now step into the caldarium, the hot room. The air hits your face like opening an oven. Steam curls near the ceiling. The floor here is so hot from the hypocaust below that you need wooden sandals to walk on it. A stone tub holds heated water. The sound of the furnace crackles faintly through the walls, and the air is thick with moisture, a surreal contrast to the bone-dry desert just outside. After baking in the steam, you'd walk to the frigidarium, the cold room, and plunge into a pool of water that had been hauled up the mountain by donkey teams, stored in cisterns, and channeled into this room through clay pipes. The shock of cold water on overheated skin, the gasp, the feeling of your heartbeat slowing as the cool water closes over your shoulders. In the middle of the Judean desert, at the top of an unclimbable cliff, Herod had recreated the full Roman bathing experience: hot rooms, warm rooms, cold plunges, and a dressing room with painted walls. This wasn't just luxury for luxury's sake. The bathhouse was a political statement. It said to any Roman official who visited, "I'm one of you. I understand your culture. I live by your standards." The Northern Palace followed the design principles of Augustus's own villas. The bathhouse used the same heating technology found in Rome's finest facilities. Every stone, every fresco, every heated floor was a message, and the message was, "I belong." For a man whose Jewish identity was constantly questioned, whose Idumean blood made him an outsider in his own kingdom, that message mattered more than comfort. But Herod still wasn't finished. The bathhouse served the public areas of the fortress. His personal quarters had their own private baths, and the official side of Masada, where Herod actually governed, was on the other end of the plateau entirely. Walk with me to the western side, where the air is slightly cooler because the afternoon sun hasn't fully reached this face of the mountain yet. The western palace spreads before you, and it's a different beast entirely from the northern palace. This was Herod's official residence, and it was enormous, over 37,000 square feet of floor space. That's bigger than the White House's residential floors. This was the administrative center of Masada, the place where Herod received guests, held audiences, and conducted the business of governing when he was in residence. The layout was organized around a central courtyard, open to the sky, with rooms branching off in every direction. Royal apartments, guest quarters, service rooms, a reception hall with a mosaic floor so detailed and so well preserved that when archaeologists uncovered it in the 1960s, they could still make out the individual colored stones. The geometric patterns, circles and borders interlocking in precise mathematical relationships are some of the finest mosaic work from the Herodian period found anywhere. Just south of the Western Palace, Herod built a swimming pool. Stand at the edge and look into it. This plastered rectangular basin held about 550 cubic meters of water, roughly 145,000 gallons, in the desert. It was fed by the cistern system channeled through clay pipes and served as both a leisure facility and, probably, a way for Herod to show off. Imagine being a visiting dignitary, arriving at the top of Masada after a grueling climb up the snake path, drenched in sweat, sunburned, exhausted, and then being shown a swimming pool. The psychological impact of that moment would have been staggering. It said, "I have conquered this desert. I have water to waste." And yet everything you've seen so far, the palaces, the bathhouse, the pool, was only the luxury layer. Underneath all of it was a logistics operation that could keep this place alive for years without contact with the outside world. Walk to the storeroom complex on the northeast side of the plateau, near the Northern Palace. The shift in atmosphere is immediate. The air is still hot, but there's a different quality here. The faint, dusty smell of grain and dried goods seeping from the stone warehouses. 29 storerooms, each one 27 meters long, in a row, like a modern warehouse district. Excavations in the 1960s, led by the Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin, found hundreds of clay storage jars still intact, jars that once held wine, olive oil, flour, dates, dried fish, and grain, enough food to sustain the entire fortress population for years. Pick up one of those jars in your mind. Feel the rough-fired clay against your palms. It's heavy, maybe 20 pounds empty, designed with a narrow mouth to keep insects and moisture out, and wide handles for carrying. Some of the jars still had labels, inscriptions identifying the contents and their origin. Wine from Italy, oil from the groves around Jericho, dates from the Dead Sea oasis communities. Crack open one of the date jars, and the smell is thick, almost like warm caramel. Bite into a dried Judean date, and it's dense, sticky, honey-sweet on your tongue. This was the sugar of the ancient world. No cane, no beet, just this dark, wrinkled fruit that grew in the oasis communities near the Dead Sea. The wine jars held vintages from across the Mediterranean. The oil was cold-pressed, grassy and sharp, the kind of thing you'd drizzle on bread. Herod wasn't just stockpiling supplies, he was stockpiling variety. Imported wine when he could have stored only local vintages, specific oils from specific regions. This was a man who, even while planning for the worst-case scenario of a multi-year siege, refused to eat like a soldier. The storerooms also held weapons, armor, and raw materials. Enough iron for replacement weapons. enough timber for repairs. Herod thought in terms of total self-sufficiency. If the world burned down around him, Masada could survive alone, a self-contained island perched above the wreckage. And then there were the pigeon coops. Walk to the western casemate wall and you'll find columbarium towers, round and rectangular structures designed for raising doves and pigeons. Step inside one, and the smell hits you immediately, the sharp ammonia tang of bird droppings mixed with the dry warmth of feathers. Dozens of small niches line the walls, each one a nesting space. The cooing of pigeons would have been one of the few living sounds on this plateau, a soft, constant murmur underneath the wind. The birds provided fresh meat and eggs, but their droppings were equally valuable, used as fertilizer for the small agricultural plots that Herod's people maintained on the summit. Even the waste had a purpose here, nothing was accidental. And surrounding all of it, the casemate wall. Completed around 15 BC during the third construction phase, the wall ran the entire perimeter of the plateau, roughly 1,300 meters long. That's almost a mile of continuous fortification, made of dressed stone, 4 meters high, 12 feet thick. 37 watchtowers punctuated the wall, some of them rising to 78 feet. From the top of these towers, sentries could see for miles in every direction. Anyone approaching Masada would be spotted long before they arrived. Walk the wall and feel the stone under your hand. It's warm from the sun, rough cut but precisely fitted. The space between the two parallel walls of the casemate was divided into rooms, and these rooms could serve as living quarters, storage, or fighting positions. It was a wall that could house people, a wall that was also a building. So what did all of this actually cost, and what happened to the place after Herod finished building it? The answer to both questions is almost harder to believe than the construction itself. Stand at the center of the plateau for a moment. Catch your breath. Feel the wind that never stops blowing up here. Look around you at what one man built. 2 palaces, a Roman bathhouse with underfloor heating, a swimming pool, a pleasure garden, 29 storerooms, 12 cisterns holding 10.5 million gallons of water, a casemate wall with 37 towers running nearly a mile, pigeon coops, agricultural plots, all of it on a rock in the desert, accessible by a single narrow path, in a region where summer temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The total cost would be nearly impossible to calculate in ancient terms. But consider this: Herod's annual revenue from his entire kingdom has been estimated at around 900 talents of silver, somewhere in the range of hundreds of millions of modern dollars annually. And he was spending it simultaneously on Masada, on the port city of Caesarea, on his palace at Herodium, on fortresses at Alexandrium, Hyrcania and Machaerus, and on the project that dwarfed them all, the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which doubled the Temple Mount's size to about 35 acres and employed 10,000 workers. Herod was running the equivalent of a modern megastate's infrastructure program, building on multiple fronts simultaneously, funded by crushing taxes that his subjects deeply resented. Josephus, the Jewish historian who documented Herod's reign, wrote that the people of Judea went from comfortable to impoverished under the weight of his construction ambitions. And yet, Masada itself was barely used. Herod visited periodically, maybe spending winters here, escaping Jerusalem's cold rains for the desert warmth. But the fortress was never besieged during his lifetime. The Parthians never came back. The popular uprising he feared never materialized. Masada sat there, fully stocked, fully fortified, a loaded weapon that was never fired. The great irony of Masada is that the man who built it never needed it. Herod died around 4 BC, likely from a combination of chronic kidney disease and other ailments, after a 33-year reign that was, by the standards of the ancient world, remarkably stable. He was cruel, paranoid, and murderous. He executed his wife Mariamne. He killed 3 of his own sons on suspicion of treason. The Roman Emperor Augustus reportedly joked that it was safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son. This is the same Herod that the Gospel of Matthew describes ordering the massacre of every male child under 2 years old in Bethlehem. Historians debate the scale of that event, but the paranoia behind it? After everything you've just heard about this man, does it sound out of character? But he never had to flee to Masada. The fortress he built out of fear sat empty and waiting. For 70 years, it would be another 7 decades before Masada's true purpose was realized, though not by the man who built it. In 66 AD, long after Herod's death, the Jewish people revolted against Rome. A group of radical fighters called the Sicarii seized Masada from its Roman garrison and made it their stronghold. By 73 AD, after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, Masada was the last pocket of Jewish resistance in the entire region. Nearly 1,000 men, women, and children sheltered behind Herod's walls, using his storerooms, drinking from his cisterns, eating the food he'd stockpiled generations earlier. Rome sent the 10th Legion, roughly 10,000 to 15,000 battle-hardened soldiers, plus thousands of Jewish prisoners of war forced to work as laborers. They encircled the base of the mountain with a siege wall so nobody could escape. And they built a ramp on the western side, a massive earth and stone ramp that allowed them to push a battering ram and siege tower up to Masada's walls. Close your eyes and hear it. The rhythmic pounding of thousands of hammers, the scrape of stone being dragged into position, the shouts of Roman officers, the constant dry wind carrying dust from the construction into your eyes and mouth, and above it all, from the top of the mountain, silence. The defenders watching, waiting, knowing. According to Josephus, when the Romans finally breached the wall, they found the defenders dead. The Sicarii had chosen suicide over slavery. 960 people, men, women, and children. The story is debated by modern historians, and some details may have been shaped by Josephus's literary goals. But when archaeologists excavated the site in the 1960s, they found fragments of scrolls from the books of Deuteronomy and Ezekiel tucked into storage niches. They found sandals and braided hair. They found cooking pots still stained with food residue. The texture of daily life, frozen at the moment it ended. And they found something else. A date palm seed, roughly 2,000 years old, preserved in the bone-dry air. In 2005, researchers planted it. It grew. They named the tree Methuselah. A seed from Herod's fortress, dormant for 2 millennia, came back to life. The fortress that Herod built out of paranoia became a symbol of resistance. The storerooms that were supposed to feed a king's court fed a rebellion's last stand. The walls that were designed to protect one man's ego held off the greatest military force on earth for months. Stand on Masada one more time. Feel the wind. Taste the salt on your lips. Look at the ruins around you and think about what this place actually represents. It's a monument to paranoia. Every cistern, every storeroom, every tower was built because one man believed the world was coming to kill him. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Herod's world was genuinely dangerous, filled with conspiracies, betrayals, and empires that could swallow a small kingdom in an afternoon. But Masada is also a monument to something else, to the human ability to look at an impossible landscape and say, I can build here. To the engineers who carved cisterns out of solid rock with hand tools, to the craftsmen who painted frescoes on walls that most people would never see, to the workers who hauled water up a cliff face in 40-degree heat so that a king could take a bath. 2,000 years later, the ruins still stand. The mosaics are still visible. The cisterns still hold shape. And Israeli soldiers still climb to the top of Masada to take their oath of service, repeating the phrase that has become inseparable from this place: Masada shall not fall again. But here's the thing that stays with me. While Herod was building all of this, pouring hundreds of millions into palaces and heated floors and swimming pools on a cliff that nobody would ever attack, something else was happening about 30 miles northwest of here, in Bethlehem, in a structure that wouldn't have passed for one of Masada's storerooms. The gospel writers tell us the story, and 2,000 years later, nobody visits Masada to see Herod's swimming pool, but 2 billion people know what happened in that stable. Herod spent a lifetime building walls to protect himself from a world he thought was trying to kill him. And the walls held. They're still standing. But the kingdom he was so afraid of losing, it was never his to keep. And that place, that rock in the desert where the wind never stops, and the Dead Sea shimmers below like a mirror made of salt, still stands as proof of what human hands can build, and of what they can never hold on to. If this is your first time on the channel, this is what we do. We rebuild the ancient world and walk you through it. Every week, a new place, a new story, a new construction that shouldn't have been possible. Next week, we're going underground. The tunnels beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the ones Herod's 10,000 workers carved to expand the platform that held the holiest site in Judaism. The same temple where, according to Luke's Gospel, a 12-year-old Jesus would sit among the teachers and astonish them all. How they moved stones weighing 100 tons without engines, without cranes, without anything but rope, sweat, and engineering that we still can't fully explain. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you next week.